When the critical part of my story began, I was 30 years old and married to the love of my life, Nancy, who was 32 years old. We had two adorable daughters, aged 5 and 6, and were married for 8 years. I remember praising myself for the good decisions I made in life. This included who I chose as friends in high school and college, the college I went to, the business I decided to go into, the company I went to work for, and most importantly, marrying Nancy. Best decision of my life. I met Nancy during the first semester of my senior year in college when she was a graduate assistant in one of the business courses I was taking. She was beautiful, sensual, smart, and funny. I don't know for sure what her first impression of me was, but my first impression of her was, wow, I made sure I mastered all aspects of the course for which she was a graduate assistant, and in the lab session she taught. I made sure I only asked intelligent leading questions. Towards the end of the semester, I could tell from her body language that she was interested. On the first day of the second semester, I asked her out. We had a whirlwind courtship and got married 2 months after I graduated from college. One thing I quickly learned about Nancy was that she was very stubborn and could not be manipulated or even reasoned with if she wanted something. This was something that was not an issue for me, although she admitted that it was a major issue with men she had relationships with before we met. However, what was a problem for me was her obvious need to win every argument, but I loved her so much that I learned to deal with it. After college, I immediately took a job in marketing for a Fortune 500 company, and by the time I was 29, I was the vice president of a Fortune 1500 company. Despite how smart she was, the only way out was Nancy's entry into the business world was not successful. She was a great teacher, but she missed something when it came to applying what she knew to the real world. However, I believe that it was the stubborn nature of her personality that was her main flaw, so she returned to academia and at 32 became an assistant professor at a prestigious university about 15 kilometers from our home. My married life was great, not only because my wife and I had jobs that we loved, but also because we had wonderful children who were fun to be around. We had a truly loving relationship, and my sex life was better than I thought growing up, except for periods that happened every 6 months or so when Nancy and I would mysteriously increase our libido. We regularly had loving sex. In the early stages of writing this story, I thought my second best decision ever was hiring Alicia, the secretary I worked with for 3 years. This could have been a really bad decision because Alicia frankly wasn't really qualified for the job when I hired her. I'm not entirely sure what factors motivated me to hire her, but some of them had to do with her tragic past, incredible femininity, strong desire to succeed, and the fact that she had to support a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old despite the fact that she was only 23 years old when I hired her. Alicia turned out to be so smart that if she had had the advantages that I had growing up, she could have easily gotten a PhD in almost any subject she wanted. Although her verbal skills were no better than those of a high school student when I hired her, within 18 months, she was second to none among the people I supervised when it came to verbal and interpersonal skills. She was also highly organized, worked as hard as you could expect from a single mother, and became the most reliable person I knew. Just to prove to myself that my perception of her was correct, under the guise of a corporate requirement that all employees pass a certain test, I manipulated her into taking an IQ test. She scored 135, significantly higher than the average college graduate despite her 10th grade education. My smug, toasty, and naive existence came to an end 15 days after my 30th birthday. That Monday morning, I received a call from the school where my 6-year-old daughter was in 1st grade. Because the school was close to the university where Nancy worked, she could drop off and pick up the kids almost every day. And because Mondays and Wednesdays were her busiest days, I was the emergency contact for the kids on those days, so they called me instead of her. If the same thing had happened on Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday, I might never have known. My 6-year-old Lisbeth was just having a little stomach trouble, but I thought I should take her to the pediatrician's office in case it was something more serious. I called Nancy for advice, but it went to voicemail, because I know Nancy's schedule and that her only break during the day may be for 10 minutes and where her office is. Since it was just on the way to the pediatrician's office, I stopped by the university with the intention of telling Nancy or Nancy's secretary was Nancy there, not what was happening. Imagine my surprise when approaching the building in which her office was located through an almost hidden side entrance that was never used. I saw Nancy in an embrace with another man. I stopped the car abruptly. I looked long enough for the fact of treason. I took one photo of them hugging with a high-definition digital camera, took a second photo as they broke the hug with big smiles on their very visible and recognizable faces, then took my daughter to the doctor's office. I was so shocked that if this had been any other doctor's office other than a pediatrician, they would probably have assumed that it was me who needed medical attention and not Lisbeth. Fortunately, Lisbeth's problem turned out to be so minor that the doctor allowed her to return to school after lunch. Lisbeth and I went to the grocery store and had lunch together, sharing her favorite sandwich since I didn't have much of an appetite, and then I took her back to school. When I returned to work, I received my phone messages from Alicia and immediately walked into my office and closed the door. When Alicia realized that I had not answered the 3 necessary calls, she knocked on the door and entered. "What happened, Blake? You look pale as chalk. Was there something serious about Lisbeth's health?" she asked. No, I blurted out too quickly. "She just had a little stomach trouble and I sent her back to school after lunch." "Then why do you look like a zombie?" Alicia asked. "You could have told me. You know I'll get it out of you eventually." She might have been right, but I wasn't in the mood to talk about it at the time. "It's okay. I'm probably just having the same little stomach problems as Lisbeth." Alicia didn't buy it, but she left my office and I worked the rest of the day behind a closed door. Actually, working is a euphemism because I got so damn little done. That evening, I acted out Lisbeth's stomach problem for Nancy. After eating half my dinner and playing with the kids for about half an hour, I told Nancy I wasn't feeling well and in case whatever I had was contagious, I would sleep in the guest bedroom. I went to the guest bedroom, but didn't go to bed right away. I needed to decide what to do. Inaction was not an option, but a nuclear explosion, and the destruction of our family was not an option either. I somehow made it through the week without facing the problem directly. My plan called for me to do it on Saturday morning, using my fake illness for 1 more day, a fake business trip for 2 more, which I spent at a local hotel and a night at Nancy's parents' house. I basically succeeded, although Nancy had a very suspicious look on her face, especially when I stayed up Friday night for what she clearly hoped would be sex. I said that I needed to work on the computer for about an hour. "What happened, Blake?" Nancy asked, dressed in her most attractive negligee while I sat at my laptop in the office. Taking one look at her, I replied, "We'll talk about this tomorrow morning, and then I'll take the kids to the zoo so you have some time to think. Why can't we talk about this now?" "Because I sure as hell don't want to talk about it right now. That's why. So just go to bed." This was the first time in our entire relationship that I spoke to her in this way. The last time I looked at her, she was wide-eyed, but she soon left. I slept in the guest room again. Nancy looked like crap the next morning. In accordance with the agreements I had made 2 days earlier, I sent the children to play with the teenage girl who often babysits them, promising to go to the zoo within half an hour. As soon as the children were out the door, Nancy began, "How could you talk to me like that last night?" That's all she had time to say before I yelled, "Shut up, Nancy! Our conversation will consist of me talking and you listening." This caught her attention and she leaned back in the kitchen chair. "I don't know how long you had an affair, why or what his name was, but this, to put it mildly, makes me very sad." Nancy opened her mouth as if she was going to deny it, but I slammed my open palm on the kitchen table and she changed her mind. "So it will be if you want to stay married. If I ever get any indication that any of our friends or family know about this, I will file the paperwork the next day. Same thing if you ever bring him or them to this house." She flinched at the word they. "Until I have proof that the affair or fling is over, you show me a health certificate from a disease testing lab and you tell me how I can restore my trust in you. I will sleep in the guest bedroom. When I return with the children this afternoon, unless you tell me that you are filing for divorce immediately, I intend for our family life to continue as it was until Monday. But we will not have sex again until my 3 conditions." With these words, I grabbed the car keys and left. Luckily, it's hard to get depressed around little kids when they're having such a great time at the zoo, so I almost forgot about our situation until I returned later that evening. Nancy wasn't home when we got there. She returned about an hour later, just as I was finishing cooking the spaghetti and meatballs and salad to the best of my culinary ability. She wasn't wearing her usual Saturday mom clothes, but a tight dress and high heels. After Nancy got changed, we had a fairly normal family dinner. After I washed up the dinner dishes, we played the standard Saturday night family game, watched a baby DVD until one fell asleep and the other could barely keep her eyes open, and we each got the baby ready for bed and put him to bed. Once the kids were safely in bed, I changed into my cycling clothes and went for an hour-long night bike ride. When I got home, Nancy was watching a movie in the living room. She paused the movie, walked into the kitchen where I was guzzling a quart of iced tea, and said, "We need to talk a little more." "No, it's not necessary," I said, as if nothing had happened. Then I went upstairs, took a shower, and went to bed in the guest room. I made sure I locked the door. I heard a knock on it, but tried to ignore it. When it continued, I turned on the air purifier to drown out the background noise. We had basically an ordinary Sunday. I even held Nancy's hand as we walked to church. That day, the kids and I went to a family barbecue with friends, and if anyone there could tell that Nancy and I were having problems, they certainly didn't show it. However, I made some subtle inquiries to a number of my friends and family members just to see if there was any chance that they knew anything about Nancy's affair. Either my questioning was too subtly, or no one had a clue. Nancy came up to me several times during the barbecue and hugged me. I always answered this with a smile on my face. Nancy made another attempt to continue the conversation on Sunday evening, but I reacted with another late-night bike ride and then showered and went straight to bed in the guest bedroom. Many people may wonder why I took the approach I took with Nancy. There were many reasons for this. The two main ones were that the thought of not being able to be with my children every day made me very sad. And given how stubborn Nancy was, it could very well drive me crazy. We would have had a confrontation that neither of us would have been able to recover from, and the marriage would have ended. I thought that in time the marriage could be saved, but only if I took a firm stand while avoiding nuclear imprisonment. I truly believe that over the next 3 weeks, everyone we knew was fooled into believing that Nancy and I had the same relationship as before that fateful day. That is, everyone except Alicia. Alicia had something like a sixth sense, radar, intuition, or something like that because she wasn't fooled for a single day. One of the policies I initiated when I became VP of Marketing was cutting off a half day on Fridays every 2 weeks during the summer. This was so good for morale that in the 34.5 hours that people in my unit worked during those weeks, I was more productive than I would have been in a typical 40-hour work week. On Friday, about 3 weeks after the incident, everyone else left except Alicia when she walked into my office around 1:30. "Admitted, Blake, I won't leave until you do," she said, plopping down in the chair opposite my desk. At first, I tried to pull the wool over her eyes, but she didn't accept any of it. "I know you need to complete your contract with Jenkins before you leave here today. This is a very comfortable chair, and I will not leave or allow you to do any work under the Jenkins contract until you come clean." Her cross arms and legs and cobra-like gaze left no doubt that she was going to do what she said. So I told her everything. "How long will it be going on?" she asked. "I have no idea," I answered honestly. "So you haven't had sex for over 3 weeks? Like that. I told you that you pay me enough money, especially with your overly generous Christmas bonuses, that I was able to rent a small house. And now I have an aunt living with me, the only member of my family who was worth anything. So I have a home nanny." I was a little surprised that she brought up such an inappropriate topic. "No, I didn't know that, but I'm glad you feel like you're being paid properly. Did I tell you that I haven't had sex for 5 months? She said. I muttered. "That's too much information, Alicia." "Actually, that's not true, Blake. Your current situation has given me the opportunity I have been looking for the last 2 years. A chance to change our relationships. You'll be out of town on Tuesday night next week, and you'll be taking me with you. If you don't, you can start looking for a new secretary starting Wednesday, after which I'll give you 2 weeks' notice." After this mind-blowing statement, she stood up, walked around the table, and planted a kiss on me. Then she turned and headed towards the door. Just before she walked out the door, she said, "I know all about the company's policy on affairs and sexual harassment. I also know how to deal with them." I sat at my desk, stunned for the better part of an hour. By the time I thought it all through, I realized that one of the reasons I may have hired Alicia was because I sensed a latent sexuality in her that contributed to her incredible femininity. Although Alicia was not as beautiful or sensual as Nancy, I had to admit that she had a factor that could not be properly analyzed. I needed to think carefully. By Monday, I had several questions and several decisions based on how those questions would be answered. The first thing I did was call Alicia into my office, close and lock the door. "Were you serious on Friday?" "I've never been more serious in my life. You know that I have 2 small children, so I probably won't get a divorce. What if I make up with Nancy, then I won't have sex with anyone but her? I know it. I'm not asking you to fall in love with me. How do we get around the romance and sexual harassment policies?" I talked to a labor lawyer, friend of mine, who assures me that everything will be fine, as long as we both sign waivers and keep it confidential. If a company tries to enforce a policy against us, we may be able to prevail in a lawsuit. Plus, we both know enough about each other's personalities to know that we can be completely discreet and can trust each other to be honest with each other. If the worst happens with your glowing recommendation, I'll find a job somewhere else. I looked at it for a long time, but they didn't blink. She looked back at me. I walked up to her and kissed her. I said, "Get a waiver from your lawyer friend and arrange for us to travel together on Tuesday. Book 2 hotel rooms on different floors, but you won't use yours." A wide smile appeared on Alicia's face. She turned and walked out the door, slapping her butt before leaving my office. For the rest of the day, no one could feel that anything had changed in our relationship. On Tuesday, Alicia and I behaved very professionally in the limousine to the airport, on the plane to our destination, and in the taxi from the airport to the hotel. After we received our separate keys from the hotel reception, Alicia slipped the $5 bill and asked him to take the suitcases to her room, and we would split them later. Then she grabbed my hand and led me to the elevator. As we rode up in the elevator, the look she gave me must have been the most passionate look in the history of mankind. I really don't know how she did it, but within 2 minutes of us entering my room, we made love. "Got it," I smiled. We then walked into the hotel dining room without touching each other and tried our best not to look like we were lovers while we ate our dinner. After dinner, we went for a walk in the local park, and once it got dark, we actually had skin-to-skin contact. Back at the hotel, we went to our rooms and called our families. About half an hour after I finished talking to Nancy and the kids, Alicia knocked on my door. The next morning, Alicia returned to her room and changed into her typical conservative work clothes. We left our bags with the concierge and headed to the first of our 2 meetings. There would be no physical contact between us for the rest of the trip. Before the first meeting, I told Alicia that if she had any comments, she could express them without hesitation. There was no reason to pass me notes or anything like that. You are smart enough to know what to say and what not to say. Don't hide your light under a bushel. She broke into a wide smile when I told her about it. Both meetings that day went very well. Alicia was charming and smart, and although she played a minor role, a number of her comments were very insightful. Both the potential business partner and supplier we met with were very impressed with our presentations, including Alicia. On the plane back, I voiced what I had been thinking about for the last 6 months. "You know, Alicia, that if you took executive training, you would become an excellent assistant marketing director and ultimately a marketing director. In fact, in a couple of years, you could undoubtedly do my job just as well as I can." "Are you serious?" she asked. "Very seriously. Of course, I would need an adequate replacement secretary before I would recommend you for executive training." "Are you sure you don't just want to tell me that this is a good way to avoid having sex with me in the future?" she whispered. "What in the last 24 hours would make you believe that I didn't want to continue having sex with you?" I whispered back. The biggest smile I've ever seen in my life appeared on her face. "Can we talk about this tomorrow?" "You don't have anything planned between 3 and 5 p.m. tomorrow from 3 to 5 o'clock in the evening. We will be open and talk about both training for leaders and our future intimate relationships." The next day, Alicia and I had the strangest meeting I have ever had with anyone in my life. We planned down to the last detail who she could hire to replace her as my secretary when she began executive training at the company. how we will date, and what Alicia needs to put herself in the best position to succeed in both the business world and our personal relationships. After that, everything went quickly. I bought Alicia's aunt a used car so she could get a job as a teacher's assistant at the school. Alicia's children attended, and she could transport them when needed. Alicia had a friend who worked in another division of our company who was unhappy with her job, but truly wanted the position that Alicia held. She was over 50, and although she held her own opinions, she was very competent. I had no illusions that she would be nearly as good at her job as Alicia, but I felt comfortable enough to hire her. After a 2-week transition period where Alicia worked with my new secretary to get her up to speed, Alicia began her leadership training. Even before she started leadership training, Alicia and I would go to her house separately for 5 days a week around lunchtime. Once she started executive training, her classes didn't start until 10 in the morning, and her kids and aunt weren't home by 8. So we had a good hour and a half every weekday to make sure our sexual needs were taken care of. One day I consciously thought hiring Alicia was the best decision I ever made in my life, better than marrying Nancy. For better or worse, Alicia had put me in such good spirits that the fact that Nancy still showed no signs of meeting the 3 requirements I had laid out for the restoration of a real sexual marital relationship bothered me less and less. This was very mysterious to Nancy. There were signs that Nancy had probably ended her affair, and she certainly tried various ways to get me back into her bed, although due to her inherent stubbornness and need to win every argument, she did not agree that I told her about the need. One evening, after we returned home from a party where she had drunk more than usual and the children stayed overnight at her parents' house, she made every effort to seduce me. "Blake, I really need you." "Then do the 3 things I said were necessary, Nancy? That or divorce are still the only 2 options," I replied. "You must get sex elsewhere, otherwise you would never be able to refuse me," she moaned. "All I have to do to turn you down, Nancy, is imagine you cheating with your lover. Whether you believe it or not, my mind is under control, and my mind continues to be hurt and disgusted by your affair." With these words, I finished drying myself, threw the towel into the laundry basket, went to the guest room, and locked the door. Meanwhile, the relationship with Alicia couldn't be better. There is one special day that will forever remain in my memory. It was Friday, and since Alicia was graduating from her leadership training that day, a ceremony that started around noon, we had a few extra hours at her house. After sex, we chatted in bed. Alicia was told that she would receive an award at the ceremony. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out 2 gifts for her. The first was a very stylish, sleeveless blue-gray dress with a lieutenant's jacket, which I hoped she would wear to the ceremony. She thought it was beautiful and agreed. The second was a sapphire necklace that complemented the dress perfectly. She began to cry. She kept muttering that she loved me while she continued to cry. For some reason, this combination drove me crazy. By the time we left, in separate cars wise for the ceremony, she was extremely well put together and beautiful. At the ceremony, by unanimous vote of her classmates and teachers, she received the award for being the most outstanding student in her leadership training class. I was very proud. It was over 6 months after my ultimatum to Nancy, and only about 3 weeks after Alicia had completed her executive training when Nancy finally began to give in. For the previous 2 months, I had been showing signs that this might be the case because she seemed to be sad all the time, and my cheerful disposition irritated her. One Wednesday after dinner, she said, "Blake, this Saturday we can hire a babysitter and go somewhere private to talk about getting back together like a real married couple. I have every intention of fulfilling the 3 conditions that you have laid down and from which I will never deviate. Although I don't like them, I need some recommendations. Of course, I will sort everything out," I replied with a smile on my face. When Alicia and I met the next morning, I told her directly about my conversation with Nancy. Of course, by that time, I had real feelings for Alicia. It's impossible to have a very satisfying, indeed impressive sexual relationship with someone you respect and not develop real feelings. However, if Nancy was truly serious, I especially owed it to our children to get our marriage back on track. Alicia cried a little. I wiped away her tears. I knew this day would come, Blake, and it would be very hard for me. But I understood the situation when I found myself in it, and I cherished the last few months spent with you so much that I can get a thrill from them for the rest of my life. But let's not waste the time we have left until your situation is completely resolved. That Saturday, Nancy and I went to a strange place, given the type of conversation we were about to have, a minor league baseball game. There were almost no spectators in one part of the stands, so we went and sat there. In fact, it was probably the most secluded place there was, and the environment seemed to reduce rather than increase stress levels. If things had gone badly, most likely no one would have known. Whereas if we were in a fancy restaurant, there might be a scene. First of all, Blake, I want you to know that I never stop loving you. However, after my second pregnancy choice, do you remember how excited I was during it? She said with a thoughtful smile. I nodded my head in agreement. Sometimes I had outbursts when I either couldn't control myself or could barely control myself. It was during one of these moments in my office that one of my married colleagues, William, found me. I have very vague memories of the circumstances surrounding what happened, but the point is that we had sex. After that, whenever I had outbursts and he was nearby, we made love. Nancy looked down at her hands and sobbed quietly for several minutes. She pulled herself together and continued. It was almost as if I wasn't cheating on you. It was like another world. Until you shared with me your knowledge of the situation, which I still don't understand where you got it from, I didn't even think about the adverse consequences. Then when you so harshly, for which I do not blame you, laid down the law for me, my well-known personality flaw of always having to win an argument and of being so stubborn forced me to strengthen my relationship with William. Instead of immediately tearing them apart, it was only after 2 months of thinking that I realized that I would lose you if I didn't start acting rationally. I went to a psychoanalyst, worked hard on my problem, and I think that now I have solved it. With these words, she pulled out a document from the envelope she was holding in her hands. This is William's affidavit, stating that our relationship ended almost 4 months ago. In fact, the document she handed me was a notarized affidavit written by a guy named William Montrose. A photograph was attached to the notarized affidavit. This was the same guy with whom I saw Nancy in a tight embrace on that fateful Monday. How did you manage to get him to sign this? I asked. I told him that if he doesn't do this, I will tell his wife about our affair. He really didn't want that. And after I assured him that if there were any adverse legal consequences after you read the affidavit, I would provide him with financial security, Nancy responded. I suppose he was the only lover, Nancy? Yes, I assure you, she answered with tears in her eyes. This solves issue number 1. How about a health certificate from a disease testing laboratory, and how can I regain my trust in you? I asked softly. With these words, she handed me the second document from the envelope. This was a complete set of tests for diseases. Actually, 2 different ones. The first was dated a day after the date William Montrose signed his affidavit with results provided a week later, and the second was dated 10 days ago with results provided yesterday. Both times she received a completely clean bill of health. That solves problem number 2, I smiled. Point number 3, how to regain your trust is more difficult, Nancy admitted. Tell me, is this enough? She asked, handing me a 2-page document. On the first page was a statement she signed for her psychiatrist to provide me with any information I requested. The second was a notarized affidavit from a psychiatrist stating that she did not think Nancy would stray again, and that in her opinion the problems she faced that precipitated and continued the affair were no longer a problem. Is that enough? She asked expectantly. I've thought long and hard about this third point over the last 6 months, and especially in the last few days when it seemed like Nancy was finally ready to capitulate. This is a very good start, Nancy. Perhaps it would have been enough if you had given it to me a couple of weeks after I spoke to you. However, since it took you 6 months to get to this stage, after careful consideration, I came to the conclusion that I needed something more. I want you to sign a postnuptial agreement that states that if you have another affair while we are married, I will get sole custody of our daughters, although you will have liberal visitation rights, and that I will get the house and 60% of our family property. Of course, I didn't tell her, and I had no way of knowing whether she knew it or not, that no matter what we said about custody in the postnuptial agreement, the family court could overturn it in the best interest of the children. However, it would certainly give me an advantage in any proceedings before a family court judge should they become necessary. Nancy promised to see a lawyer next week, prepare and sign the necessary documents. After that, we kissed and held hands. Once the game was over, we went out to play mini-golf, had dinner at a casual restaurant, and then went home and watched a DVD. Nancy was very disappointed that despite what she did, I refused to make love to her. Once everything is completed, I said with a slight smile, "You will get more from me than you bargained for." We had a great family day on Sunday. The real complication arose on Monday. I was already really afraid to tell Alicia that we only had 2 days left together at most. I found her in tears when she opened the door that morning. "What's the matter, baby?" I asked, taking her into my arms. She said something, but it was so distorted that I really didn't understand the joke. Something about how it wasn't her fault, that she will do what I want, and that kind of nonsense. After sitting with her for a good 15 minutes, holding her hands and wiping away her tears, I was finally able to understand her story, interrupted by occasional sighs and tears. It sounded something like this. My obstetrician-gynecologist made a mistake in indicating the date of my next injection. I didn't notice this myself. When I came in on Saturday, the doctor noticed this before giving me the injection. She asked if I had been sexually active in the last 2 months. At this moment, despite her gloomy demeanor, Alicia grinned. Alicia then somberly continued to tell her story. I told her a simple yes. She had this weird look on her face and gave me a complicated pregnancy test. After looking at the results, she said that I was 3 weeks pregnant. It stuck with me instantly. This was the end date for her leadership training. I swallowed twice. Alicia looked me straight in the eyes. "If you want me not to have this baby, Blake, I will," she managed. I thought for a few minutes before speaking. I was sure that this was not what she had planned. I was also sure that the idea of having Alicia's baby was a bad idea in some ways, but in other ways it was either not that bad or a really good idea. I kissed her softly on the lips. "It's your body and your choice, Alicia. However, I would prefer that you have the child. It would have to remain our secret, and I would not be listed on the birth certificate, but I would contribute to his or her upbringing both financially and with my time. I'd find a way to make it work without Nancy finding out." Alicia fell into my arms, sobbing, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." It seemed like this was repeated 100 times. I stroked her head. When she regained her composure, I told her the bad news for her, not for me, that Nancy had finally come to her senses. "Tomorrow could be our last day together, honey," I told her. Alicia straightened up, smiled broadly at me, despite the tears staining her cheeks, and said, "Then I'm going to take tomorrow off, provided that my boss, namely you, allows me to make love to him." I asked for the afternoon off in case Nancy had a signed prenuptial agreement that evening because she would need some action, and I needed several hours to recover. On Tuesday evening, Nancy handed me the prenuptial agreement with a shy smile on her face. I returned to the master bedroom. That night we made love. I was surprised at how easily Nancy and I returned to our old lives. Have a wonderful life until that fateful Monday. One of the reasons was that she was definitely less stubborn and no longer felt like she had to win every argument. Overall, it has become softer. This, coupled with my exclusive sexual relationship with Alicia, while Nancy and I were fighting, allowed me to truly forget about her infidelity. Everything worked out for all participants. Alicia gave birth to a healthy, happy boy, my only son. Believe it or not, after some hints on my part, at Nancy's suggestion, even though I don't believe she knew I was the father, I took a natural childbirth class with Alicia and was in the delivery room. 3 years later, Nancy received a place at the university. Alicia was by far the best assistant marketing director and then marketing director I have ever had. When the company we worked for was sold and I received windfall gains from my stock options, I retired without any financial problems at an advanced age. I recommended Alicia for the position of vice president of marketing. The transition team was smart enough to accept my recommendation. As I write this, I am a stay-at-home dad. Alicia and her 3 kids live a block away, and I watch her kids and mine when they are not at school while I do what I've always dreamed of, writing the great American novel. All the adults are very happy and all the children are well-adjusted. People might ask me if I ever had sex with Alicia again. They can, but I won't answer. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Listening to the next one. listening to the next one, listening to the next one, listening to the next one, listening to the next one.